Welcome, Katarina Jakhelln Semb, the director of the new production of ARIADNE AUF NAXOS, and Alan Gilbert, the conductor. So happy to have you here, Katharina. It's the first time for you.
Yes. Very exciting.
Yes, and extra happy because you are a sort of Scandinavian neighbor. You come from Norway. And yeah, but Alan, this is not the first time for you because you have been here several times. And lucky us, you are also now our chief conductor and music director. So, this opera, ARIADNE AUF NAXOS, it's the third opera by Hugo von Hofmannsthal and Richard Strauss. First it was Elektra, and then Der Rosenkavalier, and then ARIADNE AUF NAXOS. It's perhaps not the most, the best known of his operas, but perhaps one of his finest, I don't know. What makes it so attractive? Could you just, in a short couple of words, say what you like about this piece? Katarina?
Maybe talk about the heart of the piece, which is really the story of Ariadne, which is the opera that is performed within the greater work. And Ariadne has been left by the person that she loved the most and that she risked everything for. And so she's really mourning and preparing for death because her pain is so strong that death is really the only way she can see that her pain will cease. But her fairy tale or her story is completely different. And she's supposed to open up for a new love. And so she's like telling herself this story about her coming death. And when it comes, suddenly she doesn't tell the story anymore. She's actually living it. And she's open because she doesn't know what death is and nobody knows what death is. We don't either. And then she's actually also susceptible to what is going to happen, which is the new love. And so I think the message is in ARIADNE AUF NAXOS is that if you dare to love, you also win life. And I think it's a beautiful kind of starting point for this opera.
Yeah. What do you say, Alan?
No, it's beautiful what you say, and I totally agree. I kind of see this opera as Strauss's ode to opera, his ode to composition and the power of music and the power of telling stories. It's a meta-opera in a way. It's a story about putting on an opera production. And it's very funny and realistic, and in the first part, the Vorspiel, you get all the behind-the-scenes intrigue and the jealousies and the ambitions and the competitive feelings and the practical considerations of satisfying the patron and the person who commissioned the work and things that I'm sure Strauss himself dealt with in real life. But at the end of the day, we get the production of the opera, and the idea of mixing the Commedia dell'arte and the opera seria makes it a kind of self-conscious presentation, because it's, again, even then, even in the second part, which is the opera, you're aware of the fact that it is an opera. And what's so beautiful is, connected to what Katarina just said, is how the opera affects everybody within the story. And Zerbinetta is the character who bridges the two parts, the Vorspiel and the opera, and she ends up transformed. And somehow Strauss is writing an opera about the power of opera. And obviously that should eventually that's what we want the audience to feel too. And it has some of his most luscious, beautiful music. And Strauss often explored themes about writing, about composition. Capriccio is the whole discussion about which is more important, the words or the music. And this is another kind of self-conscious, self-referential meta-opera, but maybe his most successful.
The two parts, the prologue and the opera, they are quite different. I think they are quite different when you listen, and also the way the drama is on stage. What would you say are the main differences if we start with the music, because it's another tempo in the two parts?
Well, in a way, the opera proper, the second part, is more traditional. It's more through composed. You get arias and ensembles and music that just it's not as chatty. It's not as much about the text. The first part, the Vorspiel, is really conversational, and there's so many words, and it's very, very, very wordy, and you get
super theatrical, right?
It's like a show, and there's just so much happening. And so musically, it's much more pointillistic and recitative. You know, it feels like a long recitative until you get the composer's aria, which is about music finally. And so that's sort of the bridge to the second part. But you're absolutely right. It's a totally different world, and he's trying to do a totally different thing with each part.
But I think it also reflects like the story. If you read the letters between Hofmannsthal and Strauss, because they didn't meet so much, so then you have a lot of documentation, and this was made in 2 parts. So they started with the opera, and they had like another setting around it, and they had all these issues, you know, this, like I said, it's wonderful to read about the artistic vision, but there's so much administration also. Are we going to do it there? Can they have a big enough pit, etc.? And so, in effect, a couple of years later, Hofmannsthal suggested to write the prologue, which is very true to home for, I think, anyone that does collaborative art. Like if you're a writer, you're God in your own universe, but there's so many gods in Ariadne and in the prologue. And so it's really kind of telling these tensions, and also the compromises you sometimes have to do when you co-create. And some of those compromises are horrible. Some of them are really amazing. Like, you know, they wanted a tenor for the composer, but they ended up with, you know, a mezzo that's really, really fitting and really beautiful. And I think also for the composer, the story is also, when do you compromise too much? When do you compromise your artistic integrity too much? And of course, he is challenged by Zerbinetta and also kind of falls for her, and like the aria in the prologue, also duet is sort of like you really feel the coming of the opera. It's kind of this resting point in this very, very busy prologue. And I think that what you see in the end is even Zerbinetta is transformed, like you were saying, and that it is the happy marriage between high art and entertainment art, in effect. I think that is sort of the coming together of the duality of Ariadne auf Naxos.
Well, that comes very much to the fore in Zerbinetta's aria, because it's a total showstopper, and in a way doesn't really fit into the opera, which is very romantic, and suddenly you get this kind of you know, traditional Italianate aria with cadenza.
Yes, like a bel canto aria.
You can't believe how long it is, and you know, it just goes on and on and on, and it's almost impossible to sing, but we're lucky that we have this amazing singer.
Sophia's Bloom is
wonderful.
You feel that, is it not going to end? No, it's not, and it goes on and goes on.
And that's kind of also a little bit of an inside joke, because composers would often give big arias to the singer that they particularly liked in real life, and you can feel the attraction between the composer and Zerbinetta in the Vorspiel, and then in fact she ends up with the biggest aria in the whole show.
Yes, and also I think in this opera, I guess, I mean, Hofmannsthal was a little bit younger than Strauss, and so earlier in Elektra, I mean, there is this respect and reverence for Strauss, who was such a huge star, but in Ariadne you really feel Hofmannsthal like having his ambition and feeling very strongly about the story of Ariadne. And you can feel it a little bit in the work sometimes. I think that there are 2 horses pulling the wagon, and I know that they had also a little bit disagreements especially about Zerbinetta, because Hofmannsthal really wanted Ariadne to be the big heroine, and then Strauss makes this 15-minute long amazing aria for Zerbinetta. So, but this also makes this exchange, and sometimes these little bit disagreements really makes the genius of the work also.
They disagreed also about the composer. There are a lot of dialogue about that, because Hofmannsthal, he really wanted a male singer, a tenor, and Strauss, he didn't. And his argument was that, you know, in every opera house there will be a mezzo-soprano, a smart, intelligent mezzo-soprano who can do the part of the composer. So he was very pragmatic. So that was the reason. But you feel when you sit in the audience, I mean, the enormous impact of these 3 female roles. The composer, the mezzo-soprano Ariadne, which is a fantastic role for a more dramatic lyric soprano, and of course Serbinetta, as you've been saying about the coloratura. How does that power? I mean, would it be possible to think that the composer was a tenor? What do you say? What will happen if we had a male? Or, what does Strauss gain by having these three female voices?
I would, if I may, just answer it this way. I also think that the piece is a little bit of an homage to Mozart, and Mozart so famously wrote for trouser roles, Cherubino, and I personally think that part of theater, to make it more meaningful, is to take it out of reality. That's why so often composers write operas about a foreign country, or Turandot, Puccini wrote, or Madame Butterfly. You take it out of the world of reality to make a story that can be more focused on for its own sake. So in a way, having a woman playing the composer, which is a trouser role, is not realistic, and it forces you to accept theater on its own terms in a way. So I personally can't imagine it any other way. And it happens also that Strauss was uniquely brilliant at writing for the women's voice.
For sopranos, amazing.
I mean, that's some of his greatest music. Of course, the trio at the end of Rosenkavalier, and the three roles, as you point out here. I mean, it's totally in the middle of his best work, I think.
Yeah.
And I think it's so nice what you say about the reference to Mozart, because I know they were putting Rosenkavalier to Figaro's Wedding, and Ariadne was likened to Zauberflöte, so it's so nice that you have Zauberflöte in your season together with Ariadne.
Yeah, people can see both.
Yeah.
It is equilibristic, this opera, extremely equilibristic for the singers, of course, but also for the members of the orchestra. It's always almost like everyone is a solo player.
It's a surprisingly small orchestra. If you don't know, you'd think that there are 300 musicians, but actually there are only, 37 or something. It's a very small ensemble, but it's written in such a way that it feels very rich and opulent. But it does mean, as you say, that every part is essentially a solo. And everyone has to step forward in a way that maybe they should all the time, but they really have to in this opera, because it's just a large chamber ensemble.
Yes, you almost have soloists on stage, which is also this strange thing with opera. There's no choir, but you have 17 soloists, and you almost have soloists in the pit as well. So, and I think it's perfect for this opera house. I think for Strauss and Hofmannsthal, they really wanted this size. So it shouldn't be like the largest house. It is perfect for Ariadne to have it here in Stockholm.
Yeah, and you have created the set designs together with the German set designer Susanne Münzner.
Yes.
So can you say something about your thoughts? How you?
Susanne Münzner, of course, is very well known in Germany. And when we started talking, we talked about this duality and the difference, this meta levels of reality. So the prologue is sort of our reality, and then the opera is the creation itself. And so we decided that for the prologue, we really wanted it to be like a tabula rasa, like a white slate that gets written on, and that the color and the real life really comes in the creation itself. So the opera has more color, more richness, more depth in a way, where the prologue is a little bit like paper-like. It has we all know this from Corona and Zoom. It has sort of this two-dimensionality in a way. Lots of characters running back and forth like this, but with the opera you have more depth, more color, in a way more life.
But you still have the walls, though, so you're aware of the fact that you're, in a way, looking at a screen. You mentioned Zoom.
Yeah.
It's, in a way, you're aware of the fact that there is a fantasy world that is being observed.
Absolutely, and we use this also sort of as a limit also for the characters, that they should know that they are trespassing a limit between the real and also for this with the composer. Strauss really wanted to have him in the end. He's like, why is he not in the end? And he should come and be unhappy with his piece. And Hofmannsthal said, but why should he be unhappy? It's very well written. So we have invited the composer in the end because we think it's very unfair that he should not enjoy his beautiful work and he is allowed to join his piece of art in the end.
Do you recognize yourselves in this? You know, in the characters. Have you been in situations like this described?
It's so funny when the soprano comes and they're all worried about, you know, is my aria longer, and the dance master is this obsequious figure who only wants to please, and it's you can totally see these people in real life, but I mean it's Strauss writing about his own experience, undoubtedly.
Yeah, and also this, when you have a commission of a work, there will be expectations, and then it's hands off and let art be free, but we all know that it is a dialogue that can be challenging, for it has also to do with expectations, which is something we also use in the staging. We have lots of shadows, projections in a way, because we all go into situations with certain expectations, and then the reality of it is also different. That's also how it is when you start working with a piece. You have expectations about how it should be, and it's always a little bit different. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, you know, but it's never exactly what you expected.
I wanted to ask you, if I may, and forgive me for doing it in this public forum, but I'm just curious about your directorial decision to have the Haushofmeister be the actual master of the house in disguise. Is it because he has some sort of secret ambition to be the producer or composer himself, or what was your thinking? We haven't actually talked about that.
No.
I think it's brilliant, but I would love to hear you explain those.
I think that was from the earlier version. Also, they used this Molière play where you had character of Javier, I think, which is the rich man, and it's sort of the audience that doesn't understand art, you know. So he was actually a character, and then in the prologue, Hofmannsthal sort of elevates him and makes him gives him all power in making him mysterious, that you don't know who he is. And then in the beginning we had this, like we were looking really at the 1920s as sort of a loose reference to our visuality, and then we thought about the Great Gatsby, this man who's always like throwing parties that he doesn't attend. And then I thought, but wouldn't it be fun for him if he's an eccentric, well-to-do man to be able to be a fly on the wall in his own party and actually hear the conversation that people don't dare say to him. So we really thought that this would be an experience for him, and that he sort of his performance that he enjoys. It starts very early in the prologue. It's not the opera only itself, and he gets some truths served very coldly that you probably would have been protected from normally. And in the end, I think he is also transformed by the opera. And you know, in the beginning, he wants to make it lighter and everything. And I think he is also maybe a representation of the audience, that you have to bring people in the room to actually experience art, to really, really understand what it is, and to have an enjoyment of it.
Yeah, and the Molière play is Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. This is a comedy. I mean, it's more comedy than tragedy, and so. But nowadays, when composers come to us here at the Royal Swedish Opera, they most often have tragic stories they want to tell. I mean, that's the normal, I think, idea that you have if you're going to write an opera. Have you any ideas why that's so? Why are there fewer comedies, opera comedies, than tragedies?
Yes.
You think it's because it's harder to do comedy, right?
It's harder to do comedy, but I also think people need this practice room for death and sorrow. I think this to go and experience. We're so happy here. We have 17 characters, nobody dies, you know? So we talk about the comic part and the tragic part, but it's actually not tragic. It's almost like a reversed Tristan and Isolde, because they are actually singing them. It's like a Liebesleben, you know, they go back to life. But I think also this, that you have so many tragic operas, is because we need it. Especially maybe in our cultures, we have very little sorrow culture or grieving culture in Scandinavia. We're very pragmatic, you know. I think we need this as kind of a waiting room to practice our own sorrow through what happens on stage. I think that's one of the reasons, maybe.
I look at Verdi, and he wrote 2 comic operas out of his dozens of operas, the first and the last, actually. And his achievement in Falstaff is so astonishing because it's hard to make elegant, fine comedy feel like serious art. He manages it, but it's hard for most people. I think Mozart did a good job, and Rossini, of course. But somehow, maybe it's true what you say, that it's our way of experiencing sorrow without having to actually live it, because it's something that's so difficult, and of course everyone in life has to go through it from time to time, but it's nice, it's a kind of escape to be able to experience it and walk out the door of the theater at the end of the show.
Yeah, and then you're a soul. But I think it's interesting you mentioned both Verdi and Mozart, because of first time, I think the first comedy he wrote, he had just lost his whole family, but then he had this brilliant librettist in the end, Boito, and the same with Mozart with Da Ponte. You need a brilliant text to make a good comedy, and that you have in this is the best couple is Hofmannsthal and Strauss. It's genius.
The drama has to be more, I think, driven by the text, and of course you need to be as brilliant as Richard Strauss or Mozart or Verdi to make that also happen in the music the way he does in this piece. Yeah. So one of the central lines in the opera is, of course, in the composer's aria when she says that music is the highest and the most holy of arts. And it's actually Hugo von Hofmannsthal who says this as well, because it's his words. So I suppose he thinks that music is the highest. So do you agree? What you say, Alan? Is it?
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree too. Because it's so immediate. It speaks directly. You don't need you don't need a language to receive music. You go straight to the heart. You know, it's one of the few medias that goes straight to the heart. So.
And I think. I mean, I was at the theater last night. I went to Dramaten, and I love legitimate theater. It's one of my favorite things to experience. But with music, I think it's possible for the same text, as it were, to mean different things. Of course, to different people, but even to the same person on different occasions. There's some music I listen to, and sometimes it makes me feel happy, sometimes it makes me feel sad. Same music, even same performance. If I listen to a record or a CD or Spotify or whatever we do these days. But the possibility of music to constantly change and mean different things at the same time, I think does make it universal. Nothing against all the arts, and I'm happy that we have theater and painting and dance and everything, but I've made my life choices and I'm sticking with music.
Yes, and now we've been talking, so I think we should go into the world of music. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.
Pleasure.